The Pale Citadel was old, older than most of the species that used it. It hung in the dark of space like a great silver eye, circling a star that had long since begun to die. Its corridors were wide enough for creatures of every size and shape, and its chambers were filled with the soft hum of translation machines that turned 1,000 alien tongues into something everyone could understand. Today, the central hall was full. Representatives from over 40 spacefaring civilizations had gathered in the great curved amphitheater at the heart of the station. They sat in rising tiers that wrapped around a single open floor, the speaking circle. Some of them breathed oxygen, some breathed methane, a few didn't breathe at all, but all of them had come for the same reason: humanity. Ambassador Vorath of the Keth Dominion stood at the center of the speaking circle. He was tall, nearly 3 meters, with a hard black shell that covered most of his body, and a cluster of dark, unblinking eyes set deep into his narrow face. His species had been part of the Galactic Council for over 6,000 years. They had seen younger races come and go. They had watched civilizations rise and burn and be forgotten. Vorath carried that weight in the way he moved, slow and deliberate, like a creature that had never once needed to rush. He raised one long, segmented arm, and the chamber fell silent. "We are here," he said, his voice clicking through the translator in a flat, measured tone, "to discuss the species known as humans. Designation: Sol 3 primates. Homeworld: Earth. They achieved faster-than-light travel 14 standard cycles ago, and have since established 11 colony settlements across 3 star systems." A holographic display flickered to life above the speaking circle. It showed a rotating image of Earth, blue and green and white, wrapped in a thin skin of atmosphere. Beautiful in its way, fragile. Vorath continued. He listed the facts about humanity the way someone might describe an animal found in the wild. Humans were small. Their average lifespan was laughably short by galactic standards, barely a century, and most of them didn't even reach that. They had no natural armor, no venom, no claws worth mentioning. They couldn't regenerate lost limbs. They couldn't survive in vacuum. They had no telepathic ability, no bioelectric field, no sonic weapon hidden in their throats. They were, by every measurable standard the Council used, one of the most physically unremarkable species ever to leave their home planet. Their world was no better. Earth sat in a volatile region of its solar system. It was shaken by earthquakes, battered by storms, scorched by wildfires, and frozen by ice ages. Its oceans were filled with predators. Its land was covered in creatures that could kill a human in dozens of different ways. By all logic, the species should not have survived long enough to build fire, let alone starships. And yet here they were. A ripple of quiet amusement passed through the chamber. Several delegates exchanged glances. The Moravan delegate, a creature that looked like a 6-limbed bear wrapped in silver fur, let out a low rumble that the translator rendered as a polite laugh. Vorath waited for the chamber to settle, then spoke again. "It is the recommendation of the Assessment Committee that humanity be classified as a protected species under Section 9 of the Galactic Charter. They will be placed under the guardianship of the Lirathi Collective, who have generously offered to oversee their development and ensure their safety." In the upper tiers, the Lirathi delegate dipped her smooth, wet head in acknowledgement. The Lirathi were an amphibian species, graceful, patient, and deeply committed to what they called the duty of care. They had sheltered 6 younger races over the centuries, guiding them gently away from conflict and toward what the Lirathi considered more noble pursuits: art, philosophy, agriculture, quiet, harmless things. Vorath laid out the terms. A Lirathi protection fleet would be sent to Earth's solar system. Human military development would be gradually scaled back under Council supervision. Weapons research would be redirected. Colony expansion would be managed and monitored. Humanity would be given time to grow, but only in directions the Council approved. The vote was called. 43 species, 43 votes in favor. Not a single voice of dissent. It was done in less than 10 minutes. In the far corner of the observation gallery, behind a low railing that separated the public seats from the main chamber, a woman stood alone. She wore the dark blue uniform of the United Earth Defense Corps, neat and pressed, with a silver bar on each shoulder that marked her rank. Her name was Nyla Voss, and she was the highest-ranking human military officer within 4 star systems. She was 41 years old. Her dark hair was cut short and streaked with early gray. Her face was calm. Her hands were still. She had listened to every word, without moving, without reacting, without so much as a shift in her breathing. She had expected this. She had told her superiors back on Earth that the Council would try to cage humanity with kindness, and she had been right. But knowing it was coming, and hearing it spoken aloud in a room full of creatures who thought they were doing her people a favor, that was something different. She waited until the chamber began to empty, then walked to the edge of the speaking circle and raised her hand. "I would like to address the Council," she said. His cluster of eyes turned toward her, and for a moment there was something in his expression that might have been surprise, or perhaps just the mild curiosity of someone watching a small animal do something unexpected. "The floor is open," he said. "You may speak." A few delegates who had already begun to leave stopped and turned back. Others settled into their seats, with the look of people who expected to be briefly entertained. Nyla stepped into the speaking circle. She was the smallest person in the room by a wide margin. The ceiling arched high above her. The tiers of alien faces stretched out in every direction. She clasped her hands behind her back and looked up at the Council. "Thank you," she said. "I appreciate the Council's concern for my species, truly. But before we accept your generous offer, I have one question." She paused. The translation machines hummed softly. "You say humans need protection," she said. "I'd like to know, from whom?" The chamber went very quiet. The silence in the Council chamber lasted 5 full seconds. That doesn't sound like much, but in a room full of over 40 alien species, each one older and more powerful than the last, 5 seconds of pure silence was a long time. Nyla stood in the center of the speaking circle, with her hands behind her back, and waited. She was in no hurry. Ambassador Vorath was the first to respond. His dark eyes shifted across his narrow face, and his translator clicked softly before his words came through. "Commander Voss," he said, "the galaxy is not a gentle place. There are many threats that a species as young and as limited as yours would be unable to face alone." He raised one segmented arm and gestured to the holographic display above the circle. Images appeared, blurry, violent, taken from sensor logs and battlefield recordings. Brage raider ships tearing through a convoy. The hollow swarm consuming an orbital station like a living fog. Vryn warlord fleets burning a colony world until its atmosphere glowed orange. "The Dry-Yi Raiders," Vorath said. "Ruthless. They attack without warning and take what they want. The Hollow Swarm, a mindless bioorganic force that cannot be reasoned with. And the warlords of the Vryn Expanse, who respect nothing but strength. Any one of these could wipe your colonies from the map before you had time to send a distress signal." Several delegates nodded. The Moravan representative let out a low grunt of agreement. The Larathi delegate watched with her large, wet eyes, full of what looked very much like pity. Nyla nodded slowly, as if she were considering his words carefully. Then she said, "May I use the display?" Vorath gestured his permission. Nyla pulled a small data chip from her uniform pocket and placed it on the console at the edge of the speaking circle. The holographic display flickered and changed. What appeared was not a star map. It was not a weapons schematic. It was not a fleet deployment. It was a photograph. Old, flat, two-dimensional. It showed a city, or what had once been a city. Every building was flattened. The ground was scorched black. A single concrete dome stood in the distance, half collapsed. The sky was a pale, empty white. "This is a city called Hiroshima," Nyla said. "It was destroyed in a single moment by a weapon my species built 80 years before we left our own planet. One bomb, one flash of light. 80,000 people died in the first second. Thousands more in the days that followed." The chamber was still. She changed the image. Another photograph. A long, muddy field stretching to the horizon, lined with trenches and filled with smoke. Bodies lay in the dirt. This was called the First World War. It lasted 4 years. 20 million dead. We fought it with guns, poison gas, and sharpened metal. And when it was over, we buried our dead, rebuilt our cities, and then 20 years later, we did it again. The second one killed 80 million. She changed the image again, and again, and again. She showed them the fall of empires. She showed them revolutions, and sieges, and last stands. She showed them humans surviving in deserts so hot the sand could burn skin, and winters so cold that blood froze in the veins. She showed them sailors crossing oceans in wooden boats, held together with tar and hope. She showed them climbers standing on the peaks of mountains, where the air was too thin to breathe. She showed them footage from the early space program. Tiny metal capsules launched on top of controlled explosions, carrying people who knew there was a very real chance they would not come back. "We are not a careful species," Nyla said. "We are not a cautious species. We break things, including ourselves. We fight, we bleed, we grieve. And then we get up and we keep going, because that is what humans do. That is all we have ever done." She paused and looked around the chamber. The amusement was gone from every face. The Moravian delegate had gone very still. The Larathi representative's gills were fluttering in a rapid, uneven rhythm that Nyla had been told meant deep distress. Vorath's antenna had gone rigid. He said nothing. Nyla pulled up one final file. It was a military report, stamped with the seal of the United Earth Defense Corps. 6 months ago, she said, a Drage raider fleet attacked one of our colony ships, the Carolina. She was a transport vessel, carrying 900 civilians and a crew of 65. She had light armor and a small escort of 2 gunships. The holographic display showed the sensor logs. 12 Drage raider ships dropping out of faster-than-light, weapons hot, moving in attack formation. The colony ship was slow and heavy, built for distance, not for war. "The Drage outnumbered our escort 6-1, Nyla said. "They hit us hard. We lost 1 gunship in the first 90 seconds. She let the recording play. The council watched as the remaining human ships moved, not away, but toward the raiders. The Carolina herself changed course, turning to put her heavy cargo hull between the civilians and the enemy guns. Her crew vented atmosphere from non-essential compartments to seal breaches while still firing back. 14 crew members died in the first exchange, Nyla said quietly. The rest kept fighting. On the display, the human gunship weaved between the raider ships, drawing fire, forcing them to break formation. The Carolina launched her emergency shuttles, not to evacuate, but loaded with mining charges rigged as warheads. They detonated inside the raider formation. When the recording ended, the Drage fleet was debris. Twisted metal and frozen vapor drifting in the dark. The nearest Lirathi patrol arrived 3 hours later, Nyla said. They found the Carolina still on course. Her crew had sealed the hull breaches, treated their wounded, and held a service for their dead. They did not call for help. They did not run. She turned off the display, and the chamber fell into its natural dim light. You listed 3 threats, she said. The Drage, the Hollow Swarm, and the Vryn warlords. We have already met the Drage. They will not trouble that shipping lane again. She looked at Vorath. She looked at the Lyrathi delegate. She looked up at the rows and rows of ancient, powerful species who had just voted to put her people in a cage. So I ask again, she said. You say we need protection. From whom, exactly? Because the galaxy has been trying to kill us since we crawled out of the ocean. And we are still here. She stepped back from the console, clasped her hands behind her back, and waited. Nobody laughed this time. Nobody said a word. The human diplomatic vessel, Steadfast, was small by galactic standards. Most council species built their ships wide and tall, filled with open spaces, gardens, water features, and rooms designed for comfort. Human ships were different. They were tight, efficient, and built by people who understood that space was cold and empty, and did not care whether you lived or died. Nyla walked through the narrow corridor toward the operations room, with her boots clicking against the metal floor. Her speech to the council had bought them time. Not much, but enough. The vote still stood. Humanity was still classified as a protected species, but the council had agreed to a 72-hour review period before the Lyrathi fleet would be dispatched. 72 hours. That was all she had. The operations room was small and square, filled with screens and the quiet hum of processors. 2 people were already inside, waiting for her. Lieutenant Danny Cortez sat at the main terminal, surrounded by 3 floating displays that cast pale blue light across his face. He was 26 years old, lean and dark-haired, with quick eyes that never seemed to stop moving. He had been assigned to Nyla's team as an intelligence analyst, which meant his job was to read things that other people didn't want him to read, and find patterns that other people didn't want him to find. He was very good at it. Dr. Grace Whitfield stood by the window, looking out at the Pale Citadel with her arms crossed. She was in her mid-50s, tall and steady, with silver-streaked red hair pulled back in a loose knot. She was the Steadfast's chief science officer and cultural liaison, a combination of roles that meant she spent half her time studying alien biology and the other half trying to explain humans to aliens without scaring them. "How did it go?" Danny asked without looking up from his screens. "About how we expected," Nyla said. She sat down at the table and rubbed the bridge of her nose. They listened. They were impressed. They were maybe a little frightened, but the vote didn't change. Grace turned from the window. They won't change it based on one speech, no matter how good it was. These are species that think in centuries. We've been in space for 14 years. To them, we're children throwing a tantrum. "So we need something else," Nyla said. "Danny, tell me you found something." Danny leaned back in his chair and cracked his knuckles. "None of them good." He pulled one of the floating displays around so Nyla and Grace could see it. It showed a list of species names, dozens of them, with dates and status markers next to each one. "I've been going through the Council's public archive," he said. "Not the classified stuff, just the regular filings, meeting minutes, resolution records, census data, trade reports. All of it is open to any council member, but nobody ever reads it because there's about 400 years of it, and most of it is incredibly boring." "But you read it," Nyla said. "I read all of it," Danny said. "And here's what I found." He pointed to the list. In the last 300 years, the Council has classified 9 species as protected under Section 9. 9 species that were told they were too young, too weak, too fragile to take care of themselves. Every single one of them was placed under the guardianship of the Lyrathi Collective. He tapped the screen, and the status markers changed color. Red. All of them. And every single one of them is now completely dependent on the Lyrathi for survival. Their military capabilities were dismantled within 2 generations. Their population growth was managed and reduced. Their colony expansion was frozen. 3 of them no longer have functioning governments of their own. They're administered directly by Larathi oversight councils. Nyla stared at the screen. They were absorbed. Slowly, Danny said, gently, with great care and kindness, but yes, absorbed. Grace walked to the table and sat down. Her expression was the kind of calm that came from long practice at controlling anger. The Larathi aren't evil, she said. I want to be clear about that. They genuinely believe they're helping. Their entire culture is built around the idea that stronger species have a duty to protect weaker ones. They think of it the way a parent thinks of caring for a child. The problem, Danny said, is that the child never grows up. The Larathi don't let them. Nyla was quiet for a long moment. She looked at the list of names on the screen. 9 species, 9 civilizations that had once been independent and were now wards of a kindly empire that would never let them leave. This isn't about protection, she said. No, Grace said, it's about control. But I don't think the council sees it that way. I think most of them genuinely believe they're doing the right thing. Some of them know exactly what they're doing, Danny said. He pulled up another display. I ran the numbers on human development speed compared to every other species in the council's records. It's not even close. The chart showed a curve, a steep, almost vertical line that shot upward, while every other species followed a slow, gentle slope. Humans went from wooden sailing ships to landing on their moon in about 500 years, Danny said. The Keth took 11,000 years to reach the same point. The Larathi took 8,000. The fastest species before us still took 3,000. He looked at Nyla. We're not just fast. We're so fast that we break their models. Their projections can't even predict where we'll be in another century because we don't develop in straight lines. We jump. We skip steps. We make mistakes and somehow turn those mistakes into breakthroughs. Grace nodded. That's what scares them. Not that we're weak. That we're not going to stay weak. Nyla stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the Pale Citadel hung in the dark, glittering with 1,000 lights from 1,000 different worlds. Somewhere in there, the council was probably already congratulating itself on saving another helpless species from itself. We have 72 hours, she said. Words aren't going to change their minds. They need to see what we are with their own eyes. What are you thinking? Danny asked. Nyla didn't answer right away. She just stood at the window, looking out at the dark, and somewhere deep in the back of her mind, a plan began to take shape. Not a speech, not an argument, but a demonstration that no species in that chamber would ever forget. I'm thinking, she said slowly, that we should be ready for anything. As if the universe had been listening, the station's emergency lights flickered on 3 hours later. The alarm cut through the Pale Citadel like a knife through still water. It was a sound most of the delegates had never heard before, a deep, pulsing tone that came from the station's oldest systems, built into the walls long before any of them were born. It meant only one thing. Something had torn a hole in subspace, and it was very, very close. Nyla was already moving before the alarm finished its first cycle. She ran through the corridors of the Steadfast, with Danny and Grace right behind her. The ship's small bridge was barely big enough for 4 people, but it had everything they needed: sensors, communications, and a weapons console that most diplomatic vessels didn't carry. Danny dropped into the sensor station, and his fingers flew across the controls. What came up on the screen made him stop. "Hollow swarm," he said. His voice was flat and controlled, the way people speak when they are very scared and very trained. I'm reading thousands of individual units pouring out of a subspace rift about 900 kilometers off the station's port side. Nyla looked at the screen. The swarm appeared as a spreading cloud of red dots, growing larger by the second, like blood seeping into water. Each dot was a bioorganic attack drone, A living thing, roughly the size of a small shuttle, with no mind, no fear, and no purpose other than to consume. They ate metal, they ate energy, they ate anything they could attach to. A swarm this size could strip a station to bare framework in hours. "How long until they reach the Citadel?" Nyla asked. "At current speed, 40 minutes, maybe less." Grace was already on the communications console. "The Council is in full panic. The Keth are deploying their warships into a defensive wall around the station. The Lirathi are pulling their transports back behind the perimeter. Everyone else is either running or arguing about who should be running." Nyla watched the tactical display. The Keth warships were forming a rigid line between the station and the swarm, a solid wall of heavy guns and thick armor. It was a textbook formation, the kind of thing that worked very well against an enemy that attacked in straight lines. The hollow swarm did not attack in straight lines. Even as Nyla watched, the cloud of red dots began to shift and spread. It was splitting into dozens of smaller clusters, each one curving in a different direction, feeling for gaps, probing for weak points. The swarm had no brain, but it had instinct. The same kind of blind, relentless instinct that drove a river to find its way around a rock. The Keth wall would hold for a while, but the swarm would find the gaps. And once it got past the line, there would be nothing between it and the station but empty space. Nyla made her decision in 3 seconds. "Danny," she said, "signal the pack." Danny looked at her. There was a brief pause, not hesitation, just a moment of understanding, passing between two people who both knew what was about to happen. "Yes, ma'am," he said. He opened a narrowband channel, encrypted on a frequency the Council didn't monitor, and sent a single coded burst, 6 words. The response came in under a minute. 6 ships, small, fast, and sharp-edged, dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the system. They were human escort vessels, each crewed by fewer than 40 people. They had been shadowing the Steadfast since it left Earth space, hanging back at a safe distance, just in case. Just in case had arrived. Nyla opened a channel to the escort group. "All ships, this is Commander Voss. We have a hollow swarm bearing on the Pale Citadel. Council defenses are holding, but they won't last. We are going to break that swarm before it reaches the station." A voice came back, calm, steady, a little amused. "Copy that, Commander. What's the plan?" "No wall, no line. We scatter. Run the Larkin pattern. Bait clusters, collapse them into kill zones, and burn them down. Danny will feed you targeting data from the Steadfast. Grace is reading the swarm's movement in real time. Trust the data. Trust each other. Don't be heroes." A brief silence, and then, "Understood. Let's go hunting." The 6 human ships broke formation and dove into the swarm. The Council fleet watched from behind its defensive wall. What they saw did not make sense to them. The human ships were not fighting the way the Keth fought, holding position, absorbing blows, returning fire in disciplined volleys. The humans moved like nothing the Council had ever seen. They scattered in different directions, each ship moving independently, weaving and rolling through the swarm clusters at speeds that should have been reckless. They drew drones after them, pulling them into tight groups, then turned sharply and opened fire into the bunched mass. When one cluster was destroyed, the ships split apart and did it again, and again, and again. On the Steadfast, Danny was talking non-stop, his voice a steady stream of numbers and coordinates fed to the escort ships through the encrypted channel. Grace sat beside him, watching the swarm's movement patterns on a separate display, calling out shifts and surges before they happened. "Cluster forming at bearing 170, Grace said. 60 units. They're going to try to flank the second ship." "Got it," Danny said. He relayed the data instantly. On the display, the second escort ship, a vessel called the Sparrow, banked hard, dropped below the swarm cluster, and fired upward through its center. The cluster shattered. But the swarm was vast, and it was learning. Not thinking, it couldn't think, but adapting, the way a fire adapts to wind. Drones began converging on the human ships in larger groups, moving faster, pressing harder. The escort ship Ridgeline took a direct hit. A swarm drone latched onto its port engine and began tearing through the hull. The ship spun, venting atmosphere, and for a terrible moment it looked like she was going down. Then a second escort, the Wren, came roaring in from below, guns blazing, and blasted the drone off the Ridgeline's hull. The Ridgeline steadied, sealed her breach, and got back in the fight within 90 seconds. It went on like that for over an hour. The human ships took hit after hit. Armor plates were torn away. Compartments were breached. Crew members were hurt. 17 people died, crushed by collapsing bulkheads, burned by ruptured power lines, pulled into the void through cracks in the hull. And still the humans fought. On the Steadfast, Nyla gripped the edge of her console as the ship rocked from a near miss. Her shoulder hit the wall hard enough to leave a bruise along her jaw, but she didn't make a sound. She just steadied herself and kept calling orders. Slowly, the red cloud on the tactical display began to thin. The swarm was breaking. Clusters of drones peeled away from the main body and scattered back toward the subspace rift, retreating into the dark place they had come from. Without enough numbers to overwhelm, their instinct turned from hunger to survival. In 87 minutes, it was over. The last drones vanished into the rift, and the rift collapsed behind them. The space around the Pale Citadel was filled with debris, fragments of swarm drones drifting in the dark like the remains of a shattered hive. The 6 human ships regrouped. 2 of them were badly damaged, trailing sparks and vapor. All of them were scarred, but all of them were still flying. The Keth defensive wall had not fired a single shot. The Larathi transports had not moved from behind the perimeter. The entire Council fleet, the combined military power of 43 spacefaring civilizations, had watched 6 small human ships do what they could not. On the bridge of the Steadfast, Danny leaned back in his chair and let out a long, slow breath. His hands were shaking. Grace pulled off her headset and pressed her palms against her eyes. Nyla stood at the viewport and looked out at the battered escort ships holding formation around the station. She thought about the 17 people who wouldn't be going home. She thought about their names and their faces, and she held each one in her mind for a moment before she let them go. Then she turned to Danny and said, "Get me a channel to the Council. I'd like to address them again tomorrow." Danny managed a tired smile. "I don't think they're going to say no this time." The Council chamber looked different the next morning. The lights were the same. The tiers of seats still rose in great curves around the speaking circle. The translation machines still hummed their quiet hum. But something had changed in the air. Something that had nothing to do with temperature or atmosphere filters. It was the silence. When Nyla had first walked into this room 2 days ago, the silence had been the kind that came from boredom, from polite indifference, from 43 species looking down at a small creature and waiting to be mildly entertained. That silence had been soft and careless and full of certainty. This silence was different. This silence was heavy. This silence paid attention. The seats were full. Every delegate had come. Nyla noticed that several of them had brought additional advisors and military observers. Officers in uniform, analysts with data pads, strategists who watched with sharp, careful eyes. They had come to study her, to understand what they had seen. Nyla walked into the speaking circle alone. She looked tired. She had not slept. There was a dark bruise along the left side of her jaw from where the bulkhead had caught her during the battle, and she hadn't bothered to treat it. Her uniform was clean and pressed. She had made sure of that. But the fatigue was in her eyes and in the way she held herself, straight-backed but heavy, like a person carrying something they couldn't set down. She looked up at the Council and began to speak. "Yesterday," she said, "a hollow swarm emerged near this station. By the time your defensive fleet was in position, the swarm had already begun to split and probe for weaknesses. If it had reached the Citadel, conservative estimates suggest it would have breached the outer hull within 20 minutes and reached the populated sections within an hour. Nobody disagreed. 6 human escort ships engaged the swarm. They were outnumbered by a factor that I'm not going to bother calculating, because the number would only make what happened sound more dramatic than it needs to be. They fought for 87 minutes. They broke the swarm. 2 of our ships sustained heavy damage. 17 of our people were killed. She said the number the way a person says something that hurts, clearly without flinching, because the dead deserve to have their numbers spoken plainly. Their names were read at a service aboard the Steadfast this morning. I will not share them with you, because they are ours. But I will tell you that the youngest was 22 years old, and the oldest was 51, and every one of them knew what they were flying into, and not one of them turned away. The chamber was absolutely still. Nyla took a breath and continued. I did not come here to gloat. I did not come here to threaten you, or to prove that humans are stronger than you thought. Strength is not the point. The point is that 2 days ago, this council voted to put my species in a cage. A comfortable cage, a well-meaning cage, but a cage. You looked at us, and saw something small and soft and breakable. And you decided that the kindest thing to do was to wrap us in cotton, and make sure we never had the chance to hurt ourselves. She looked at the Larathi delegate. The amphibian woman sat very still, her large dark eyes glistening, her gills barely moving. I know your intentions were good, Nyla said to her, quietly. I believe that. But good intentions do not make a cage into a home. She turned back to the full chamber. Humanity does not want war with anyone in this room. I need you to understand that. We are tired of fighting. We have been fighting since before we had language. Fighting the cold, fighting hunger, fighting each other. We know the cost of violence better than any species here, because we have paid it over and over again, in ways that would horrify you if I had time to show you all of them. Her voice was steady, but there was something underneath it. Not anger, not pride, but a kind of grief that came from knowing too much about what her own species was capable of. But we will not accept protection that comes with a leash, she said. We will not let our children grow up in a galaxy that has already decided what they're allowed to become. We will not hand our future to someone else, no matter how kind they are, because we have learned, the hard way, over thousands of years, that the only people who can be trusted with humanity's future are humans. She let that settle. Then she straightened her shoulders and her voice changed, still calm, still measured, but with the clear, firm tone of someone making an offer. I am proposing a counteroffer. Humanity will join this council, not as a protected species, but as a full member, with an independent military, an independent government, and the right to expand and develop as we see fit. A murmur passed through the chamber. Nyla raised her hand, and it died. In exchange, we will sign mutual defense agreements with any species that wants one. If you are attacked, we will come. Not because you asked us to, not because a treaty requires it, but because that is what we do. We run toward the fire. It is in our nature, and you saw that yesterday. She paused. We will also share our combat doctrines, our tactics, our strategies, our approach to warfare, with any species that asks. We don't hoard knowledge. We never have. If our way of fighting can help protect the species in this room that truly cannot protect themselves, then we will teach them freely. But we will not cage them either. We will not manage their growth or limit their development, or decide for them what kind of civilization they should become. We will stand beside them, not above them. That is the difference between protection and guardianship, and it matters. She stopped speaking and stood in the silence she had made. Ambassador Vorath was the first to respond. He rose slowly from his seat, his dark shell catching the light, his cluster of eyes fixed on Nyla. "Commander Voss," he said, "you ask us to accept your species as equals when you have been in space for barely a generation. You ask us to trust a people who, by your own admission, have spent most of their history trying to destroy each other. Why should we believe that you will not turn that violence outward?" Nyla looked at him. She had thought about how to answer it for a long time, not just since she came aboard this station, but for years, ever since she first looked up at the stars and realized that someday, someone out there was going to ask humanity to explain itself. "We don't ask you to trust us," she said. "We ask you to watch us, closely, carefully, for as long as you need to." She took a step forward. "Every good thing humanity has ever built, every peace treaty, every alliance, every hospital, every school, every moment of mercy, was built by people who knew exactly how terrible they could be. We don't have the luxury of innocence. We know what lives inside us. We have seen it, we have done it, and we chose, again and again, to be better." Her voice softened. "That choice is the only thing I can offer you. Not a guarantee, not a promise that we will never fail, just the knowledge that we see ourselves clearly, and we keep choosing anyway." The chamber was silent for a very long time. Then the Moravian delegate, the great silver-furred creature who had laughed at humanity 2 days ago, rose from his seat and spoke a single word that the translator rendered as, "Yes." The Kef delegate rose. "Yes." One by one they stood. Not all of them, not every species. Some remained seated, their faces unreadable, their doubts still heavy. But enough of them stood, more than enough. The vote passed. Humanity joined the Galactic Council as its youngest full member. Nyla walked out of the chamber on steady legs, though her hands were trembling inside her pockets. Danny fell into step beside her in the corridor, and for a while they walked in silence. "Do you think they actually believe we come in peace?" Danny asked. Nyla allowed herself a small, tired smile, the first real smile she had worn in days. "It doesn't matter what they believe," she said. "What matters is that they'll never make the mistake of thinking we're helpless." They reached the viewport at the end of the corridor and stopped. Outside, the Pale Citadel turned slowly in the fading light of its dying star, and around it, like a ring of battered iron, the 6 human escort ships held formation, scarred, dented, patched together with emergency welds and stubborn determination. No one had asked them to leave. No one was going to. Grace was waiting for them at the airlock to the Steadfast. She had 2 cups of coffee in her hands. Real coffee, not the synthetic version, brewed from beans she had brought from Earth and guarded like treasure. She handed one to Nyla and one to Danny. "To the 17, Grace said quietly. "To the 17, Nyla said. They stood together in the corridor of their small battered ship, drinking coffee and looking out at a galaxy that had just learned something important about the strange, fragile, stubborn species from the little blue planet. Humans did not need protection, but the galaxy might need theirs.